All right, I'm going to call to order the June 28th meeting of the West Sacramento Public Financing Authority and ask our guest to join the council, the board and the staff in the Pledge of Allegiance. Aaron, why don't you lead us in the pledge tonight?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so we'll now proceed. Item 1, which is presentations in the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the authority. Don't have any cards, but are there any late submissions for this item? Okay. Seeing none, then we'll proceed to item 2, which is consider the consent agenda, which consists only of item 2.
Move the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Ledesma, seconded by Mr. Esquivel. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that carries. Item 3 is a public hearing and consideration of adoption of Resolution 17-2 and Ordinance 17-1, creating the Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District Number 1 and approving the Infrastructure Financing Plan. Mr. Blumberg.
So I just have a few slides. It felt like, kind of a momentous occasion, so I just want to recap a couple of issues that have come up over the formation process. Just, tonight is a public hearing item, so prior to consideration of the ordinance of the resolution, we'd ask that you hold a public hearing to receive comment. Tonight's action is really about the rebirth of tax increment financing here in the city of West Sacramento. The ability to capitalize future property tax revenues to fund public improvements and other authorized projects. We were before you on May 24th with a workshop. We heard your comments and recommendations on what was then the draft plan. We've incorporated those into the document. There was a lot of policy discussion both at the authority here and at council. One of the big, I think, themes was the historic use of tax increment, the way that West Sacramento has used it to invest in the public realm, and also to use tax increment to leverage other monies, be it federal, state grants, city impact fees, and private investment. So we find ourselves at the end of the formation process. Tonight would be the last actions required to form the district. On June 14th, of course, the City Council adopted the infrastructure financing plan, and then tonight we've got the other final actions I'll go into in a minute. Sensitive roller. So in a nutshell, we've got the 14 sub-areas that encompass about 4,144 acres of the city, or that's roughly 28% of the city acreage. As far as we know, this is the first EIFD to be formed in the state under the EIFD law. And again, the key issue with EIFDs is that these expenditures need to have a community-wide benefit. So that's been incorporated throughout the infrastructure financing plan. And the key features, again, City of West Sacramento, of course, is the sole taxing entity participating up to 100% of the city's share of the property tax revenue could be dedicated to the EIFD over the life of the district. We see the duration of the life is 45 years from the date in which the issuance of bonds is authorized. And the maximum number of dollars that could be collected is $6.9 billion. So with regards to the ordinance does two things. You adopt the plan, and it forms the district. The ordinance would be effective upon adoption. That's a little different from the ordinance that the City Council adopts. It usually have a first and second reading. And then we also have Resolution 17-2, similar actions to the ordinance, but a couple of added items. There's the authority finding that the formation process has been conducted in consistency with EIFD law, something that Constantine can probably weigh in on if you have any questions, but we believe that we've met all the requirements. And then also, the action tonight would not be a project under CEQA. It would be an exempt project, and so all the individual projects that are described in the plan would have to come back for their own findings under CEQA. And then finally, just my last slide, there are follow-up actions that will be occurring in the future. The key one is budgetary appropriations that could be concurrent with the city's biennial budget with annual updates, or more frequently, if required. That we still need to look at the pursuit of voter approval to issue bond debt. And of course, every time we appropriate funds, the finding that the expenditures will have a community-wide benefit. And then anytime we enter into long-term debt commitments, loans, or other agreements, there would be actions of approval by the council and the PFA. And so that concludes staff's presentation. If you have any questions.
Member Kendi?
I just noticed, I think we probably should note that there was a memo at our desks about a correction in the attached report. It was page 8 of the attached report, and it took out the list of facilities under item C on page 8.
Yeah, thank you. We did have one error in the document that went out in your packet, and so that provides the errata on that. Yeah.
Questions? Paul, on page 10 of the document, I'm trying to understand the Measure G dollar flow, and it's probably elsewhere in here as well, but the paragraph 3 under the beginning of the financing section that covers Measure G.
Yes.
Can you just go over how Measure G funds are being incorporated here?
Yeah, and this probably goes back to a previous fiscal year and not the recent councils by the action with regards to Measure G, but a certain portion of Measure G does go to the city's general fund to pay for O&M, while another portion is allocated for capital projects. I think what the plan wanted to identify is that we were assuming that you would continue to have an allocation of Measure G towards O&M, and that was kind of netted out of the amount that would potentially go to the EIFD.
So the challenge for me on this is that the plain language of Measure G is that the voters directed us through the advisory measure to use the Measure G funds essentially to continue to fund community investment projects such as streets, bridges, transportation, parks, and public infrastructure. So Measure G cannot become the administrative support fund for the EIFD. I mean, that's not consistent with the voter direction with respect to Measure G. And legally, it can because Measure G was advisory only, but that advisory vote, like all of our, has been the foundation of every step that we've taken since that time. So I think it's going to be it's going to be important that we get better clarity on what that is. If it cannot simply be the administrative overhead. I mean, the administrative overhead of the EFD cannot account for 40% of the Measure G funds. In my view, I mean, that's not consistent with the voters' direction. It's one thing to have the Measure D fund specifically for the investment projects and the O&M costs associated with those projects on a relatively de minimis basis, but it can't be simply a general fund offset on administration for all purposes of economic development or for the EIFD and still be consistent with Measure G. And in my view, I mean, the author of Measure G is also sitting right next to me, so he may have an alternative point of view. But I very strongly believe that we need to hew closely. We don't ask our voters many things. And when we've asked them, they have overwhelmingly agreed with everything that we've ever asked them to do. And I think in return, we owe a high level of fidelity to the direction that they gave us at our request. So. Mr. Ledesma?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Directionally, you're right. I think the part that is a bit confusing, because I think some of the O&M here is tied to some of the redevelopment or ongoing task around managing redevelopment a little bit. Is that a true statement? Or is this totally, some of this is being budgeted for ongoing O&M for?
Right, so the O&M portion of Measure G currently pays for the Economic Development Housing Department, and through the city's budget most recently, there's an allocation that would go to offset costs in the Community Development Department for the Planning Division. That said, I think through the budget process and CIP process at the city level, that message was reiterated when we did a workshop on Measure G. I think I understand the comment here that Measure G can't be simply an administrative fund for managing the EIFD. So I think going forward, speaking from the city's perspective, the EIFD is more a financing tool that is going to be used for kind of similar purposes
Right, we
as
did-
Measure G, but
Yeah, because we did
but I
have
don't
that-
see a change to the administrative side, so.
Yeah, there was that discussion at council around, I don't recall that discussion around budgeting for that, and because there was a discussion there around how community development has to kind of, is funded to a degree out of some Measure G funds for
Right.
long-term usage, and I think some of that discussion, I'll have to go back and look at tape or think about the notes on that, but it was around directionally, making sure we had, in even those budgeting processes, having a priority, so council would be able to say, those are the priorities, so that they would have that fidelity to Measure G, and were they for infrastructure, future infrastructure projects, that this had to be done, pre-planning work on the Broadway Bridge, for
Right.
instance, might be an
And
example of that.
the point of this, the statement in the plan is to acknowledge that there's a portion of Measure G funds that are already going to capital, and we made sure that the EIFD law included the provision that allowed us to use those funds for the EIFD also. Now, that could also apply to the admin portion, but as it stands right now, as we talked about at the council workshop, there's a percentage of Measure G that can be attributed to costs that are, project management and, economic development and housing department related, a little bit for the planning division going forward, but the portion that is available for capital projects today, we wanted to make it eligible to be used under the EIFD umbrella, and that's what that portion of the plan is about.
Mr. McGowan?
Yeah, I apologize if I'm not tracking too well on the specifics of it, but the sentiment that both the mayor and Chris raised is, I think it's critical. I mean, someone who didn't take these actions before, but has been very supportive, it's based on, in no small part, on the belief that the commitment to do certain things is real. And we're not just going to tell you one thing and then 2 or 3 years later we'll shift it. I know that's not anybody's intention here, but I do want to stress that covenant, I believe, that we have with the voter, with the public out there, is very real here in West Sacramento. It's one that we do want to keep faith with. And actually, I don't know how to say this, but I think you almost want to err on the side of being very cautious and very conservative about that, and not look for ways to expand or broaden the areas where you legitimately and legally could do so. That'll get us, in the long run, that'll get us in trouble, and we'll lose that reputation that we've so justly and rightfully earned here in West Sacramento about knowing how to get stuff done. This is a great tool to continue to get things done. I would just caution that you be very, very conservative and careful about that as you go forward. How you guys define them and describe them is your business, but if you're going to take funds that aren't directly used for the project and use it for something else, it really ought to pass the damn good reason rule on everybody's scale. And if it doesn't, then you just don't want to do it. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, the plain language of Measure G, should the city direct ongoing revenue it receives from the dissolution of its redevelopment agency to fund community investment projects such as streets, bridges, transportation, parks, and public infrastructure. Now, we knew at the time of the dissolution of the redevelopment, the city did, sorry, not that there was no authority, but the city was fully aware at the time of Measure G that funding for the staffing of the agency's economic development activities was also about to be eliminated by the dissolution of redevelopment. And we could have proposed to the voters language that said, should it be used for community investment projects and for economic development purposes? We did not do that. If we're collecting $2.25 million and then spending $1.25 million on things other than community investment projects such as streets, bridges, transportation, parks, and public infrastructure, it just doesn't pass the smell test for keeping faith with what the direction that the voters gave us, again, at our specific explicit request. So I mean, yes, a portion of funding is necessary in order to make these projects happen, but we're doing it wrong if we're spending more money on the administrative costs, even if it's about these projects specifically, which I don't think we've heard that it is. It's about economic development more generally and potentially planning more generally. But even if it were just about these projects, if we're spending, more than 50% of the money on a project on our own staffing, we're not doing it right in terms of what we said we were going to be delivering. So I mean, I know this is a city, it's both us issue and primarily a city issue, but it's the language here, and just looking at those two numbers, 2.25 and 1.25, kind of pushed it forward.
I see the language.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can say this, that this is incorrect. That's not the correct number for the amount of the admin portion, at least the ratio. So we can definitely amend that to make the correct number for Measure G. The Measure G number is actually more like 5 million. The admin portion is much less than half of that. It's more like 30%, I believe. So we just need to correct the number in this section here.
Right.
And we can do that. It's on page 10 in section 4, financing section. So I understand the comment on that, appearance of that. It looks like a much higher number, but if you recall the workshop we did at council, that presents the more accurate depiction of the capital side versus the admin side.
And I think, if I may, Mr. Chair? Thank you. I think the intent, or at least this authority, this board's authority is to help with the formation and what's expected of the use of both, as we move forward with the EIFD and G. And I think it just begs clarity for this authority to kind of understand how, kind of what the exact amount is. I know it's a city budgeting issue that maybe through, how that gets communicated back to the authority in terms of what the policy is, how we program G from a staffing level or from any project level. And I know council gets sort of the quarterly or buy-in, whatever it is, update on Measure G spending, just as it does on the other initiatives. But I think that this authority can ask for maybe clarity from council and from the city manager and from about how this would be utilized going forward as part of
And
agreement to form it.
Well, if I may, Mr. Mayor, before you respond, through the chair.
Yes, Mr. McGowan.
Yeah, somewhere in here, I see that there's, we're going to go back to the voters to support the bond, is that right?
At some point, if we issue bonds, that would be required.
Okay.
Yeah,
So this is not theoretical or philosophical, this is a real political issue, because you want people like me and Bill Christoph to be able to stand up and say, this thing is frugal, this thing is tight, we're not just reestablishing some of the criticisms of the old redevelopment law. The council's doing what they said they were going to do, and we're all going to do what we voted for, and we all need to be able to stand up and I'm not suggesting anybody's going the other way, but that's the importance of us getting the language and the commitment and really the covenant right. So we can say that and be honest about it and have it be convincing to the voters. And they will continue to support us if we do so. So that's all.
Yeah, and the only response I was going to give that, the numbers that are in here, I provided incorrect numbers that they look old to me. So the ratio that it stands right now is, it's much less than that 50%. It's more like a 30% to 70% on the capital side. And we don't anticipate making major adjustments to that as we go forward, but that's definitely something that the city council would need to weigh in on.
Yeah, this will come at the council. I'm strongly opposed to situational budgeting of voter-approved funds. We need a policy here that the council has adopted that's firm, that makes it clear. I think 30% is also too high, but that is ultimately, that needs to be a decision that is made, as opposed to every year it's, well, but we need this money for something else, or we need this, or this other thing happened, and now circumstances have changed. that's not, while we have that legal authority, that's not going to lead us to continued voters' approval of the many requests that are to come, if we're going to be able to achieve both this vision and the rest of the city's vision. So yeah, so that's what worries me, is that well, next year we'll look at it again, it'll be a different number, and it'll be, the council, maybe one of us will be absent, and then it'll just flies through and now it's 70%. There's no framework for any of these decisions being made other than, budgetary needs on the city side, on the city's general fund side. And that's the worst time to be making situational decisions around these allocations. We need policy.
So I guess that's where I'm going with, is that can we direct staff to bring a policy back to council, to bring it back to this authority, right?
So when if I could offer, when we did the community investment plan back in 2012,
Yes.
it followed with a budget policy that the council adopted that was much more detailed than Measure G. Measure G, Mayor cited the language from the measure, but the budget policy spoke more to the overall use of the funds and kind of in the whole universe of what was required to operate a community investment program. Now, Measure G came out of that, and granted, the language was very specific about types of infrastructure projects. It didn't acknowledge that there would be costs associated with delivering those projects and doing the planning work associated with it. But I think I'm hearing that maybe that's a budget policy that we need to look at to justify the current expenditures of Measure G going forward.
Well, if I may, Mr. Mayor, I would support that. You want to make that as clear and concise as you possibly can, because, and you want to formalize it and have the council bless it when they do everything else, so that the next council, and say, well, that's where we do business here. We're gonna, yes, we have the legal authority to stray from that, but, well, here's the policy. And it's if once it gets gray and gets mushy and you start to flirt around with it, you're going to lose the support of the community. We're trying to help. We can't go do this again. You want to be able to keep going back to the well for more help from this community, and I think you'll be able to do so to the extent that it's always very clear to them what you say you're going to do with the money that they authorize you to spend. So it's whatever the policy is, you kind of want to tattoo it and put it on the wall and say I'm sorry, because a lot of people ask you, can you stray from that? You say, yes, we can, but we won't, because that's our policy. And that makes life easier for everybody. It makes it harder if you want to stray from that, but I think it's critical that you have something hammered out.
Okay.
So for the plan, the plan lays these, the numbers aside, the plan lays them out as though they're board, as though they're our decision, that we've made a determination about Measure D funds.
If I could suggest that, as Measure G relates to the EIFD, within the plan document, there's a discussion of the discretion the city council would have to commit Measure G revenues to the EIFD in the future. It does not assume that any amount is committed except in terms of the analysis for the maximum collection of property tax revenue. It does assume that up to 100% of Measure G funds could be committed to the EIFD. It doesn't make that commitment. And so the section here could actually be amended. This item 3 could be amended simply to note the amount of Measure G revenues collected as of the most recent fiscal year, which would be 15-16, and it could stay silent about how those funds were allocated, and there could be no suggestion at all in terms of how much funds could be committed to the IFD. It's a simple note that that total amount could be committed 100% in the future. That's really what the discussion of Measure G was about in the finance plan.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. I mean, the annual thing, I raised this last time, I have two opinions about it. I'm concerned about the glorification of unfettered flexibility into the future. We like that idea right now, and it's worked. It has worked, but we've always had a 30-year council member here. And we've always had 75 years of experience on the council, so there was an unbroken oral history, essentially, of the exact purposes for which these decisions were made, that the voters made, and what have you. And when everything becomes super flexible, and any decision can be made at any time, any year, frankly, part of my concern is that it then has the potential of everything as a political issue every single year. And we've been pretty close to immune to that for a decade at least. But by leaving every possible door open, we're not the only ones that have opinions about what we should do each cycle. And so having a policy and a direction about what investments we're making in infrastructure on the city side through the EIFD shouldn't be okay, this year, what do you think? Right? I mean, we want people to invest. We want people to give us grants. We want people to build and buy and improve based on a vision that is articulated in our general plan and in our specific plans and elsewhere. And so having we'll just decide each year without some context, some framework, or a rolling 3-year average, or the city can change its allocation but with 2 years' notice in order to prevent it from becoming a collective bargaining. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways that you could deal with the issue of, okay, over the arc of history, flexibility is necessary to adapt to changing opportunities and conditions, while at the same time not creating complete annual open doors that every decision is up for grabs again. So that continues to be my concern about that. I know why you did it, because I probably at one point suggested it too, and I know we've had discussions about it, but it comes with a significant long-term downside in terms of the stability of vision and governance culture among the city and the EFD together.
I mean, because we did have a discussion about this document and about the up-tos and the flexibility of the plan, and which raised your concerns around that without sort of the guardrails on what we need to have, what kind of control over the going forward model for this EIFD and Measure G funds might have. So again, it does beg for, without any other voice, this document, the plan document will sort of govern, to your point, will be what people refer to. That's your policy. You can go up to, and so I think it does beg a look at what is indeed, how do you intend to spend this, or how do you intend to use this, would be the policy clarification we need. And I think it's within this body's opportunity to provide at least maybe a starting point for council to consider as a mechanism to get that process started. So again, staff could work with council on their support for that policy. I think it's kind of a bi-directional thing, because we're the ones who will have to implement it and approve it and how funds are used. And I think this body kind of represents a little bit different part of the city and the district. So I want to make sure that it has that opportunity.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, this is our opening salvo on the plan. It's not like we can never make a change to it or an addendum to it later. So I mean, we have time. None of us is leaving by the end of the year, as far as I know. So we have time to do that, but we need to do it. I think, if nothing else, the plan ultimately ought to make a very strong case for why all the increment ought to be going to the infrastructure financing purposes. Or that it doesn't mean that you couldn't make a different decision at some point in the future. But this plan and this board should be when put on different hats when we're elsewhere. But this board ought to be making the case that it is those investments in infrastructure that create the long-term tax revenue increases for employee compensation, or for new fire trucks, or for all the pressures that the council will be facing. So this document doesn't need to be kind of impartial about that question. This document should be an articulation of the case and the justification for the increment, just as it did in redevelopment, going into this fund.
Well, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. McGowan.
And just apologize again, I'm not maybe that clear what's been happening in some regards, but if you haven't already had folks making a run on this bucket of money, you will soon. I mean, it's not legally restricted. You can use this money for other things, and so to the extent that you put all kinds of non-binding thread handcuffs on yourselves to remind yourselves that you're not going to do that, that's good, you should do that. Otherwise, you're just putting this money on the table for a food fight. Next
the-
year, the year after that, it'll happen.
Yeah, and that was the intention of Measure G, is that we wanted to put the handcuffs on ourselves to a degree, like this money can't be returned to the general fund, and that was the intent, but now we're going down another level into implementation of, like, now we're really we got money and we're actually going to be using it and leveraging it in the future, so we just need to make sure we're even more clear.
So if I may, I'm trying to understand the path forward from this point. So we have some concerns, since they've been stated. So is this, as I'm reading the staff report and the recommendation, if it's continued, there's a lot of other analysis, other kind of restating of the, going back to the base year changes, 17, 18. But we may need to do that because we need to, as Mr. McGowan just mentioned, we need to get this right. So I'm just trying to figure out what the action is now before us. Are we continuing the public hearing? Are we going back to rewrite the section? Or are we accepting Mr. Blumberg's suggestion? Just to move us forward.
Wait, what was his suggestion?
His suggestion was to simplify the language, I believe, and the financing
On page
section.
10,
yeah.
On page 10, just to simplify it, and to do some editing right now. And then, or to give direction to edit in a certain way, and then you could open the public hearing and move us forward. Just trying to get direction on that.
If I could, I mean, the correction to the reference to Measure G can be made simply as I described, in which we wouldn't describe how it's used, just to note that it is, and what the amount was in the most recent fiscal year. The other issue with regards to budget policy is something that either could be put into the document, or the document could reference budget policy, and we could come back and adopt a budget policy separate. But the plan would say clearly the budget policy as adopted by the Public Financing Authority and the City Council.
Yep, that makes sense.
I would like that.
Yeah, I'm in agreement.
Yeah, I'm trying not to tell you what it should say, but it should say something. You guys can figure that out. But you got to be clear about it.
All right, so we're going to open the public hearing on this. We don't have any requests to speak on this, but does anyone wish to address the board on item 3? Seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing and return back to the board.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd ask that I'd make the motion to approve the recommended action with the addition of clarifying the language on page 10, as well as a reference to an initiation of a policy around Measure G, EIFD, spending framework, I guess that would be the work, that is initiated by this body, and works with staff to get both approval by council as well on that policy. Is that a fair assessment of where we are? At least that's where I saw it.
I'm in agreement with that. I think, again, we're pioneering new things, and so I think we need to make sure that we get it right, but it's also, we're doing something that's new. So, I think having the dialogue and having the discussion and sharpening our pencils and pens is okay. So, and I think we're doing that. So I'm supportive of that direction as well.
Yeah, I'm going to vote for it. I continue to have a lot of concerns about this, about us getting it right, including, so the issues that we've talked about, not just Measure G, but it's the allocation of other funds, of the other increment, not just the Measure G increment that needs to be part of the budget policy. I mean, Measure G too, but that's trivial compared to the bigger piece. But the other issue, which we have talked about, and we and the city have to build this out, is the way we've described the eligible categories for spending. And I'm particularly keeping an eye on induced private investment where it would not otherwise occur, and support projects, whether they're public projects or private projects. I mean, there's no secret. My view is very strong that we when we open the door in the name of flexibility to subsidizing specific private development projects in a cash way because of somebody's pro forma, it is a rat hole we will never get out of. I lived in that world when I first came on council for a long time, and it's awful, and they produced virtually no good projects in the end, and the ones that they did produce were way too expensive. I know folks want to leave the door open, but it's not as though we don't have plenty of real infrastructure projects that have multi-party benefit to them. So this still leaves those doors open, and we talked about this at the last meeting. We talked about tightening and getting better clarity, and I'm voting for this, but I'm not forgetting that we need to do that. Because I do not want to create a slush fund where every private project that needs $1 million subsidy is going to come forward. And the first one that does will open the floodgates. If we don't have a policy that says, yeah, we love your project, it's great, we'd love to help you out, but it just doesn't fit our policy. If we don't have that kind of a policy in place, we'll be smothered, and our ability to deliver the actual projects in here that the people of the community want, and that a large set of developers and other investors want to see happen, we'll be shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, in an interesting way, if you have that focus and perhaps not even that limitation, and I wholeheartedly agree with your approach there, you're then messaging, I think, the right message to the people you really want to attract. The people that need that extra subsidy, you're not going to ask, they'll be complaining about it, but they won't get in the queue because there's nothing for them, and you don't want them. There's a lot of people out there who will see this other opportunity and say, oh, they just want to know what the rules are. You set the rules down for them and say, well, hey, if you present these guys with the right situation, they'll consider giving you some assistance for this project, but not the way it's been done perhaps in the past or some other jurisdictions. And I'm really not aware of any jurisdictions that have been really, really successful by just opening their purses and wallets and just, incentivizing people to come in and do projects when perhaps a project shouldn't be either done or should be done wholly on their own nickel. I'm kind of conservative about that through the years. So I would wholeheartedly support your focused or your surgical approach to this as opposed to just, here's the bag of money, who wants some? That's not a way to go.
All right, is there any further discussion on the motion?
The only other thing I'd add, Mr. Mayor, is to make sure we get to this is that I'd ask that you consider appointing either yourself or I'll volunteer to kind of initiate this process of what a policy might entail. I just don't want this this should be an us thing, right? So we're communicating the values of what we think this entity should be, the framework should be, and we're representing the district, so we should start that, be available to start that conversation. And we should be on an action plan to get it done and not leave it out there we're going to pick this up in 6 months and then we're going to find ourselves in a situation.
Well, if I could, Paul, our next step is to go back to the council with this plan, isn't it?
Well, since the plan itself has been to the council for approval on June 14th, there's no requirement that the plan return to the council again. But with the modification to the staff recommendation to address the policy issue, we certainly would be back, yes.
Okay. Because I get a sense here we don't want to lose sight of this policy issue and clarify it while the minds are fresh, and we should go back to the council.
Yeah, I think there are two issues that are here. One is on the budget policy issues that are about both the fidelity to the voters and also our ability to have long-term, an actual long-term infrastructure plan. That's one bucket. And the second is essentially this development assistance policy question. Maybe they're related in a way I'm not thinking about other than that I raised both of them, but I think that they are to some extent distinct. The budget policy questions actually have they have corollary budget policy question issues with all the voter approved measures that the city's grappling with: J, K, U, V, G, and E, all of them. And I guess to some extent the development assistance policy also has implications for the city, though not as much because the city doesn't have that much money. Doesn't have money for development assistance anyway. That's not in this pot. But I totally agree that they need direct attention. They need the policy, the board members or the council members to be directly engaged in that. So do you think we should have you're proposing that we have a subcommittee here to look at both topics, or?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I think they're both related because they're both kind of policy issues, right? And if this is what separate matters for them to deal with or manage, but they're two policy issues we're articulating. We need to get it on paper and start that process.
Okay.
That's my idea, and that's the motion.
Okay. Then is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any further discussion?
Did everybody keep track of that? Okay.
Janet's not saying anything, so if
I will say, though, I know this is the tough, as Commissioner, Board Member Sandine has brought up, that this is a big deal. And I know it is, and we are sharpening our pencil around this, because when we started this in 2011-12, there was a great unknown, and still to an extent, as Ms. Sandine brought up, it still is. And so don't let and hope you understand our concern and how we want to manage this the right way on a going forward basis. But it's not without taking a moment to look back and say what a great job you've done to get us this point. The fact that it is nice to be first. The first one through usually is the first one to get bloodied up, and that's maybe a little what's going on here. But it is a great occasion, so thanks to staff and everybody else that has pushed this forward, because it does give us the opportunity and the tools we need to kind of continue the great work that West Sacramento has always done. So thank you.
we're going.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I want to echo those comments, especially when it comes to thanking and congratulating the staff for doing all this work and getting it ready. And I'm very pleased with what you've done. Makes me feel good. But I got to tell you, where we are today in our sophistication and our commitment and our ability to work like this and put things together and make things happen in West Sacramento, I just got to say, many years ago, we sort of kind of hoped we could get somewhere. We weren't sure how or when and what it was going to look like. You guys have taken this, the staff, quite frankly, has taken this to a place that was beyond our imagination years ago. And to be part of this now makes me extremely proud, as I am very proud of the accomplishments and the direction and achievements of the city itself. But, hopefully this gives some direction that's helpful and constructive, and take it for what it's worth. But it does not take away, the conversation we just had does not take away from the incredible high level of professionalism and intelligence and hard work that you guys have done in getting us here. I want to thank you very much for that.
Everyone's nodding. All right, thank you very much both for those comments. There's no further discussion on the motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. 4A, Executive Director Report.
No report.
4B, Report on Public Financing Authority Actions. I don't even know what that is. We have, we just took one. Item C is future agenda item requests. We have none. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.